Welcome to Mix with the Masters Q&A. What do we got here? We got 10 questions. First one from Jesse Miller. Hello, Jesse. Jesse says, saving my first energetic, emotional, full pass mix of all channels, including those still static, into automation was a huge game changer for me. Could you please share your thought process of saving the first pass in automation and why it is so incredibly important, particularly now in the DAW era where everything and anything could change with one error or small adjustment, losing that original feel and impact? I suspect there are a few people starting their automation in this way these days and getting lost more quickly as a result. Thanks for taking our questions. Well, I think you already answered it, is trying to get that first pass emotional. Way before we had automation, we would get to the point where we knew the mix really well, and then we'd say, hit tape, and the tape machine would go on, and we would get that excitement in one pass as much as we could. Now, you don't need to do that. But on the other hand, it's always good to learn your parts, learn the transition, feel how each part can build into the next. And when you've got all that, then that's when you hit automation. Do a full pass with as much of the excitement factor as you can, and then from there on, you're trimming it. That's that question. Mike Bailey. Hi, Mike. He says, your multi-bus concept has been covered many times. Why am I speaking like this? I'm going to try this again. I'm in France. Your multi-bus concept has been covered many times. What has been your covered list in your hybrid room, running out of various different summing mixers? My question is, what makes a particular summing mixer a good choice for a certain bus? And what characteristics are you looking for from the different summing buses for all the different buses in order to recreate your vibe from the console-based setup? Good question. Well, I kind of imagine that different summing buses have a different character. So for my drums and bass, I like Chandler's. It's got a nice warm Neve sound, since it's based on that. And that goes into the distressor, and I think that's it, just the distressors. And then for the guitars, I really like Paul Wolf's Tone Lux. That has a really great mid-range. For all the other kind of stuff, what it would normally go to an A bus, I really like the Neve. It's a one strip. I guess you all know what it is. I think it's 16 in or something. And it's got a little widener. It's really cool. And then last of all, the Burl. They each have just a great texture. Could you put it all in just one? Probably. And then get more of the character before you get there. But I really like, I'm trying to maintain as much of the character that I have from the desk, and this was a great way to do it. Plus, most of these guys are my friends, so I want to support them as much as I can. And well, I think that's it for that one. Okay, Esli Sujic. Do you think analog sound is making a comeback? Hey, it never went away. What are you talking about here? It's analog around me. Who says it's going away? We're not trying to do a comeback over here. We're still here. Ask my friends. Anthony Pilato. Hi, Michael. Do you have any interesting and unique ways of using reverb and delays to add space and width to your mixes? How do you achieve this? while still keeping a sense of togetherness in the mix? And secondly, which instruments in the mix are you most likely to send to a reverb or delay? Thank you. Well, it depends. If I'm doing a band like Vaccines, everybody goes to the reverb. Everybody. And more. At least that was the first record. That made everybody happy. So, pick it, make it long, have fun. On the other hand, there's other records where really it's not even using any reverbs. It's using the compression so that the compression creates the ambience by just pumping out the room out of a sound. But I think overall, I have four or five different reverbs, and they all go from very short, maybe a little room, to maybe a little longer, but it has a different character like a spring, to my favorite, the Bricasti, that I might have a nice large chamber or whatever it calls for. I mean, if I'm doing a record where it sounds like it needs to, well, you don't want to have any sense of reverb, the clear ambience is awesome on that. So I'll work everything according to what that record needs, whether it's I'm going into really long ones or different forms of short. And then I have my real plate, Electric Lady. It's a fantastic plate, EMT 140. And I tend to always go to that first. So what am I doing? All I'm trying to do is create a form of glue so that all the instruments sound like they're playing in the same, they're sharing certain reverbs so they feel like they're playing together. Other times, I use reverb for the total opposite so I can get complete separation. Maybe there's a lot of instrumentation going on. And by choosing one particular reverb for that particular instrument, for maybe like a spring reverb, it kind of shines a little light on that. And that can achieve the very kind of result I'm looking for. Or I'm trying to create one more depth where it's an ambience in the back. And that might only share one kind of reverb. Again, I'm trying to separate the front, middle, and rear of a mix. I hope you like that answer. Now, Gabriel Pinero, how do you deal with recalls? Oh, that's how I deal with recalls. Nowadays, I almost never make a mix that doesn't need a recall to change a thing or two. How do you manage that in all analog studios? You and everybody else, we're all in the same boat. Masters now are like a running recall. There's no such thing really as a, hey, this one's final. See it mastering. So the way we've dealt with it, actually I learned this, Manny really helped me with this. Obviously for you who are in the box, you don't need to be listening to my answer because I hate all of you because you have nothing to do but just go beep, it's all done. But for the rest of us, we have it hard because on an analog desk like this, if they want to do some kind of recall within certain stems, I used to just have to always recall the whole desk. Now, my guys are great at it, but you're looking at about an hour and a half, and then you're making the changes, and then you have to print, and so you're wasting a good portion of a day, and maybe you can only fit 3 or 4. And what if they 4 or 5 days later have more comments? It's very, very inefficient and time consuming. So what I do is when I'm done with the mix, my assistant runs almost 40 passes of stems. Basically, that anything is in stereo. I'll have drums, but maybe I'll have the kick as a pass, a snare as a pass, maybe the drums without the kick and the snare, maybe drums and bass. You never know. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll send group 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So 7 might be drums and bass, and 6 might be all the guitars, and then keyboards, strings, horns, if that's the case, backing vocals, and lead vocal. So I'm doing a whole variation. This is on top of the normal passes, vocal up, vocal down, a cappella, instrumental. And it takes about 3.5 hours. There's a lot of passes. But I never return to the console because now I have all my stems and we use, and you think, well, when you do that and you have certain instruments off, isn't it going to change the compression? Well, that's a very good question. And the way we dealt with that is on the SSL, I have a key. So we set it up so that the mix, every pass, the compressor is acting as if the full mix is running. And therefore, we have every pass is being controlled, and you can put them all together, and you've got yourself a very accurate mix. That's it. Bene Scholler asks, what with your hybrid setup does not work as well for you in comparison to your normal setup? Well, it's a little bit difficult to answer that question because I'm not actually the one mixing. In my hybrid room, I've set up, it's basically an indie budget or a smaller budget room where people want me to be involved in the mix, want me to mix, but they can't really afford me in the main room. Since I don't own my own studio, I'm at Electric Lady Studio B, and I'm quite limited as to how low the budget can go. So being in the having a hybrid, I have one of the guys that I've trained, former assistants of mine, and I'm very part of that image. The vision, I listen to the rough, I talk about it, and then I have them mixing it because I tell them what I want. And then when I come back in, I make my comments, and then it goes off to the artist. So I'm not really part of that day-to-day, the actual grunt work. But there's a couple of things for them. You really need a powerful computer, and we don't quite have that, and we find ourselves really running right up to the edge and crashing a fair amount. I'm going to try and address that soon. But there's a couple little things, as simple as automating the final fader post everything else, which would happen usually right before the rack with the mastering gear in there. You can't do that. The only kind of fading you can do is as you do it, it's post compression. So as you bring it down, your compression starts to come up. What are other things? For me, the way I see it is the speed. I can lean over, and I've got 6 or 7 auxes. I can just lean over, and they're on every channel. There's a bunch of stuff that's on every channel, and that's got nothing to do with the hybrid. That's the whole idea of whether you're mixing in the box or in a hybrid. Otherwise, it's really nothing. Sound-wise, from what we've set up, it sounds great. I'm not feeling like we're at all compromising. And I have the artist mix. I have faders. My guys have to use faders. I don't want them using a mouse. And that helps in the movement, the motion, the whole thing that I do. So there's very, very little issues aside from some speed and a couple of little other things that I know of anyway. Kelsey Worley, can you name a record in the past 3 years that was a game changer for you in terms of sonics or production? I'm sure there are. This is a terrible excuse to say that I'm not paying enough attention as I should, and I'm probably a bit in a vacuum because I'm in the studio all the time. And I'll probably come up with exactly the right answer tomorrow, which is a little too late. So I'm going to have to apply something to maybe, well, what have I done that's a game changer? I would say that, I don't know if it's not a game changer, but for me, it was clearly what I had been working for a year to change a certain approaches that would lend itself to a particular band, which is what I've done during my career. I did that with Coldplay and a couple others. And for me, really a special record would be Grizzly Bear Shields. I have been trying to, over many, many years, just get the sound to slowly wrap around me. And like, it seems like every year I get about a millimeter closer to being there in the mix. And I wanted to be as transparent as possible with Grizzly Bear, and with, working with Chris Taylor was so brilliant, and already a great engineer and a producer in his own right. It was an awesome teamwork to get to that point. So to me, that record, I listened to it maybe 3 or 4 months ago for the first time, just from beginning to end. And that to me is just sonically, it's a really special record. And it's not, I was able to achieve a lot of things I'd been working on, so I'm proud of that. But also the way Chris and the band chose the instrumentation and the arrangement and the songs and everything. It's a great record. Tim Broughton says, I've seen you changed speakers often in the last few years, yet the sonics of your records still have the exact same qualities, which I believe comes down to your taste. Could you elaborate on the reasons why changing your tools when you're already getting the greatest sounding records, isn't there more of a risk than anything else? Look at all the pictures through the years, and you'll see generally the larger midfields changing. But you won't see the Proax. The Proax have always remained the same. Now, maybe for the sake of marketing, I took them down. But that has always been my one reference that I need to go back to, just to be sure. And I have loved these other speakers. Sometimes I move them around because now I have a hybrid room. The Barefoots, the ATCs, I still have Yamahas sitting around, but the two constants through all these years are my Proax and my radio behind me. Those two have always been there because I need to know what's going on fairly large speakers where you get the vibe and the emotion, and then the radio where you can really hear. It's like a magnifying glass, like what is that? I'm not mixing it just so that because I expect to hear it on the radio, although that's certainly nice, on every radio in the world. I mean, all of them. I mean, every one of them, even little, tiny little ones, that's always nice to hear them on every radio. But that one behind me is just, it allows to me to really hear if the mix is going in the proper direction. Because sometimes what you think you're hearing, the radio is tells you different. And it's accurate. It's not like it's only good for that radio. And I must say the next greatest thing, and my radio is pretty unique, but what's out there right now is the Bose Mini Link, I think. It's almost as good as my radio. It's really impressive. So I've always had those two. And why the bigger ones? I mean, right now I have ATCs, the 50s, I have the 25s. I had the 50s with a big sub. Why? Because the kind of music I'm doing now, I want to feel that. And I'm able to better mold the bottom end that I wouldn't be able to do on my Proax because it only goes, so far down. And so getting that feeling of saying, okay, that low end is just there's too much energy, or it's too boomy or something like that, it allows me to really get those records even more accurate in the bottom end than I ever had before. but I still rely on my two references. Ricardo Mosca. Just so you know, MWTM I did with you 3 years ago changed everything to me. Ricardo! Thank you. I'd like to know how hard you hit your mastering rack after all multi-bus compression. Is a Shadow Hills mastering compressor doing a lot or just a touch? And also if you clip your converter or not when you're recording your mix back to Pro Tools. I tend not to be doing, well, first of all, I have 4 different compressors I can choose from. So it's not just a Shadow Hill. It depends on the kind of record I'm doing. Quite often I'm using the Shadow Hill, but sometimes I'm using Chandler's Germaniums. Sometimes I'm using Anthony's ADL. It's tubey, you know, it has a certain slowness to it because it's like the Fairchild. And sometimes I'm using Paul's modified API 2500. So it just kind of depends, but they're rarely working very hard unless it's appropriate. And because they're hitting hard, it just feels great. It's about what you're trying to get out of it for the music. But generally, if there's going to be any compression or any hitting going on, it's probably going to be at my SSL, the main stereo compressor at the desk. And the rest is just more for tone and feel, and you know, it's pretty gentle. The Germanium I always have in parallel, so it's more dry than wet. So again, there it might appear that I'm doing a lot more, but I'm really not, because it's a fair amount of the dry signal. Do I clip convert? I have the Pendulum PL2 right before I print, so before it goes into the converter. So I'm not clipping certainly there, and I'm not, Pro Tools is not my master. I go to a Tascam, and probably as many of you are aware now, I used to always do 88.2, 24-bit, and now the word has come down from certain rec companies that everything has to be 96 going to mastering. So anyway, I go to the Tascam, and then I also do a backup. I mean, it's also going Pro Tools, so I can, you know, A/B mixes and stuff like that. But there's no clipping, because I've dealt with that before I even got to the converter with the PL2. Last question. It's a good question. John Preston. How do you find the strength to do a new mix every day? I see you as an artist, so how do you keep the creativity flowing, and how can you remain inspired? Well, it always comes down to a good song. I can't wait to get up in the morning and mix a great song. You know, it's, I think Yen Voigt, a great bike racer, said, I get up in the morning, I'm amazing all day. I think it's, I'm amazing, and then I go to bed. Something to that effect. I mean, that's basically, you know, you just want to have a good time on mix a great song. Actually, I'm more often mixing 2 songs than only 1. And I have that energy because I choose to surround myself with, you know, great artists. I have a great assistant who prepares the mix so that all I have to do is sit down and mix. I don't have to go through all the preparation. He just, both of them actually, both Mark and Steve, they're just great, great assistants. And it allows me just to sit down and have fun. It's, you know, it's still, it just comes down to the song. I wake up every morning and I still love it. And I guess when the day comes that I keep waking up in the morning and I just don't have that in me, then that's probably when you'll see me fade away. And to remain inspired is because I'm always thinking about new ideas, new approaches. I never stay for very long on something that I've developed. Once it's developed, it's developed. Done. Now it's history. That was nice. Move on to something else. So staying in my comfort zone can become boring. And it can also be very dangerous because we're mixers. And mixers, we should be evolving at the same time that the bands are evolving. So that keeps me inspired. And those are the 10 questions. Thanks for joining us, Mix with the Masters. It's such a pleasure. And if you guys want to know more about what's going on, come here down to France for a week. It's a blast. Food's great. The wine is flowing all the time. And you get to meet some great people. I certainly do. We learn a lot from each other. And before you know it, the week's over. And here I am doing 10 questions for you guys, you know? Like this, like that. Yesterday was Sunday, today is Friday. It's happened so quick.